When has a gut feeling saved your life? Serious. I almost got kidnapped once. I was like 23 or so. I was walking down my street at a little after dusk. I saw a van approaching a little ahead. No lights on. Didn't think much of it due to the time of day. The van slowed down and almost started creeping. As I was approaching this part of the sidewalk which had a tall solid wall fence to a community. This gave me some pause in that quick moment. For me to keep walking, it'd have to go between the wall and the van. In the little time it took me to take a couple of steps, and as the van was getting close, I noticed that the side door was slowly sliding up. The one thought in my mind was, why isn't the light turning on inside the van? When you open the door of a vehicle, the light should come on inside it. Unless you deliberately switch that off. And I just ran to the median. I ran in front of the van, and across the street. Because if they're gonna have some use of road, kill me, have at it. But they're not getting me in one glorious piece. Immediately, the van took off like someone lit it on fire. From a slow crawl to full speed. As I looked after it to see the plates, I noticed it had no plates. And still no lights. I called the police, of course. They sent cars out, and didn't find the van. I never had anything like this happen again, and am just an ordinary person, so I don't suspect it was targeted. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Always hated the dad scout leader in my area growing up. Just seemed like a real creep. Hated seeing him at community events, soccer games, back to school nights, etc. 10-year-old me staged a hissy fit to end all meltdowns with me slamming doors, crying and breaking chute to avoid being moved from Cub Scouts, where the moms ran things to avoid Boy Scouts. Turns out the scout leader was molesting 3 or 4 of the boys in the troop and threatening to kill them if they ever spoke. Justice found him, and he's in prison. Listen to my body, twice. I started having painful period-like cramps, so I made an appointment with my obgyn the next day. They immediately gave me an ultrasound and discovered a grapefruit-sized tumor where my ovaries should be certain it was cancer. I was in surgery days later. Thankfully all the cancer was encapsulated in the tumor, so no chemo was necessary. I did have to go on an estrogen patch though. A year later, I was sitting in my bathtub and reached out for a towel. Felt a weird pain in my left breast. I knew it was cancer. I immediately pulled off the estrogen patch and then went in for a mammogram first thing the next morning. A few days later, I was having a bilateral mastectomy and reconstruction, which I had insisted on because it was my second cancer diagnosis. The 2 cancers were unrelated. My doc wanted me to have a lumpectomy and radiation, but I insisted that I never again wanted to have to tell my daughters that I had cancer. After my surgery, my tumor was tested, and it was determined to be highly recurrent and aggressive. Even though the cancer had not spread into my lymph nodes, I went through 20 rounds of harsh chemo in the hopes it will never ever come back. Thankful to say that on the 20th of April 2020, I will celebrate being cancer free for 5 years. Edit, my first award ever. Thank you fine giver Rosie Ilver. I get really bad vibes from the car park in work. It's a giant, poorly lit multi-story and I've seen enough horror films to know I shouldn't be taking it lightly. Whenever I get in, I pay attention to the floors people call the lift to keep an eye on where they're going. One time a guy got in front of me and pressed 6 while I was parked on 8. He didn't get out at 6 and was still in the lift as I got to my floor. I leave, he doesn't. So I guess has remembered has on another floor, but just before I get to the dark area with all the cars, I turned back. This guy had waited about 30 seconds, therefore held the lift to wait, and silently emerged to follow me. I just stopped and stared him down. He had a deer in the headlights look, and turned straight back to the lift. I have no idea if it saved my life, but it freaked me the frick out. I was driving a friend home late at night when I was around 21. She lived in a pretty rural area outside of St. Louis, Missouri, and about a quarter mile from her house was an old abandoned farm and farmhouse. I always thought of this place as non-threatening as she told me she and her 2 sisters would go there as kids, and they found an attic full of cool things, including a trunk of vintage woman's clothing and old love letters, like something out of a movie. Anyway, I'm driving her home, and it's a hot humid Missouri summer and we have the windows open as the late night had offered some cool air. We are also singing at the top of our lungs. We pass the abandoned farm, and I drop her off at her house. I wait long enough to see she makes it inside, and I head back out the way I came. I'm driving along, and I get to almost where the farm is, and I see two things in the road. My danger meter goes off as I had just driven this road and there was nothing there. I put the windows up and make sure the doors are locked. I get closer and I realize the items are two car batteries spaced out in the road, which was basically a one-lane road in a way that I would have to get out and move them to drive on the road. I immediately knew I wasn't getting out of the car, so I picked the side of the road that had the lesser ditch and I gunned it. I was driving a little SUV and remember feeling the car run over branches and things in the little ditch, but I just gunned it and got out of there. All the way home I felt creeped out and kept checking my rearview mirror. I called my friend the next morning and told her what had happened, and we both agreed it was weird. Shortly after that I moved to another state and didn't think much of it after that. Fast forward to 2 to 3 years later, when I was back visiting my hometown. I randomly ran into my old friend and she ran up to me with wide eyes and grabbed my arms. She asked me if I remembered what I told her that night. I said yes, and she proceeded to tell me that not too long after that had happened her family was awakened in the middle of the night to someone pounding on their sliding glass door. Her dad went to check and saw two naked, injured women and let them in, and called 911. They had been abducted from Street Louis City about 40 minutes away by two men, and brought to the old, abandoned farmhouse where the men tortured and raped them. The women somehow managed to get free and ran to the only light they could see, the light over my friend's garage. They survived, but the men were never caught. There was evidence the men had been going there for a while. My friend was convinced they had put the batteries in the road to lure me out of the car. I'm just really glad my gut told me not to. Edit, Grandma. When I was around 18, I was on a back road with some friends and a girl I didn't know was driving really fast. Now, I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie, and I have always enjoyed a calculated risk in the name of a good time, but on this occasion I told her to either slow the frick down or let me out. I literally had to start screaming at her before she listened and slowed down. A week later she crashed on that same stretch of road at 90 miles per hour, killing her and the 3 passengers of her car. My ex-husband had a friend who I just didn't like, although I could never explain why. He was very handsome, always smiling, very respectful speech, always called me mom or miss, even though he's a few years older than us. My ex used to give me shoot for expressing my feelings about this guy. I was never rude to him when he'd stopped by, but I did have trouble hiding my creeped out vibe. Fast forward to 3 years later. Guy is convicted of indecent liberties and statutory rape of his girlfriend's daughter 12-year and a 14-year female. A pain in the lungs when I inhaled. I've never been stabbed, don't know what it's like, but the pain should have been equal to it, if not worse. It had happened before, years ago. Some hot water in the shower and the pain was gone. My wife then girlfriend insisted on going to her. I insisted on hot water. I feel like we should go and see a doctor, she had said. I was diagnosed with pulmonary embolism on both lungs. Doctor said 1 or 2 more hours and you were gone. So yeah, I owe my wife one. Few years ago I was at a bar with a couple of friends. All was good, we were drinking and having fun. All of a sudden, we heard this discussion taking place just a couple of tables from us. 2 guys decided to have a shouting/threat match. I stopped everything to pay attention to them. My friends were making fun of me, saying I was gossipy. One of the guys in the discussion got up and left. Immediately after he left I told my friends we had to go. Now, let's for now. They didn't get why I was like that, but I'm their friends since forever. They reluctantly agreed. We went to a different bar in a different neighborhood, but I couldn't take my mind off of those 2 guys. The next day, the news were talking about a bar fight. Apparently the guy who got up went home, grabbed a gun, and came back for a drive-by. Killed 4 people in the process. My grandpa taught me to never ignore my gut, and I couldn't be happier to have listened. Edit, a few words. Edit 2, a few people have approached me asking if I already had published this story before. I honestly don't remember if I did. If I did, I'm sorry. Didn't wanna repost an old story. My now wife and I did the long distance thing in college, and I planned on doing my normal routine to visit her, leave Chicagoland in the morning, get to her early afternoon on Friday. Well, I'm closing my store on Thursday night and get a feeling I should leave that night. So I said back quote F it and left that night. A little after lunch on Friday, tornado sirens go off. I don't think anything of it until I head back home Sunday and drive through a town about half hour north of her. It got lit up by the tornado. I quickly realize that I had left at my normal time. I would have been smack dab in the middle of tornado. When the tornado that decimated Greensburg, Kansas came through, my family and I were on our way to my grandparents' house. We drove through Greensburg. My mom noticed the storm was getting really bad and decided not to stop until we got to my grandparents' house. By the time we got to their house, it was on the news that the tornado had leveled the town just minutes after we left the city limits. I don't remember ever seeing a storm quite so ominous. It was nearly totally dark outside, but something about that particular storm, I don't know. It was freaky. Edit. Spelling. My mum knew something was wrong with me when I was younger. Doctors didn't want to see me for another 2 weeks. Mum went into a blind rage over the phone, telling them that she was taking me to get checked, whether they liked it or not. We got to the GP. He puts a stethoscope on my back and smells my breath. Then says we need to get him to hospital now. Turns out I have type 1 diabetes, and if it waited another day I would have died. Edit. The breath part is due to the buildup of ketones in the blood. As I was in the severe stages of diabetic ketoacidosis. Edit 2. It smelled like apples. Lump in my right breast. 43 years old. Clean mammogram 5 months earlier. I just knew. 4 different doctors told me it was nothing and to come back in a year. I did not and found a 5th. Yeah, I had to argue my way into being diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of breast cancer. On the bright side, Thursday was my 5 years all clear date. About 10 years ago, I had a job that started at 6 AM on the weekends. I didn't drive and would take the light rail, which was a 15 minutes walk from the house I rented. One dark morning, I saw a person up ahead of me a few blocks away. I usually see homeless people on my walk to the light rail, and most are harmless, just trying to collect cans for the deposit or asking for change, but this guy just felt off. I could tell from blocks away that there was something wrong about him. So I crossed the street and grabbed my phone from my backpack because I still had to go to work, and this road was the only way to the light rail. Suddenly, I hear a beep 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 bump. I look over my shoulder, and it was him with his dick in his hand. That sound was the sound of his shoes hitting the pavement as he ran towards me. I took off running, screamed, "I'm calling 911," and held my phone to my ear. He must have saw and took it seriously, because he ran the opposite direction that I ran. I did call 911, but they wanted me to wait there for the cop, and I was like, frick no. I said it was because I didn't want to be late for work, but I was terrified of him finding me. I will never forget the sound of his shoes hitting the pavement. I was at the county fair when I was younger, like 8 or 9. I wandered off from my parents, and I had an odd feeling that I was being watched, but I ignored that for some reason. This man had followed me up and down the walkways of the expo hall we were standing in. As he started to get closer, I got this overwhelming feeling of fright. I called for my dad, and I could tell it startled him. He promptly turned and changed direction from me. A really quick thing, but it stuck with me all these years. It didn't happen to me, but was told by my mom. When she was pregnant with my older sister, her and her family decided to go hiking in the mountains. On the day of the hike, she suddenly felt discomfort and unconformable. So she stayed behind while the rest of her family went for the hike. Her family got lost, and if it wasn't for my mom staying behind, they wouldn't have gotten help. Keep in mind that there was no cell phones back then, so if you got lost, it was a lot harder to contact rescue to come find you. Funny enough, my sister was also born during an earthquake. Different story. A few weeks ago, I had just left my apartment complex and was heading to a friend's. I pulled out of my driveway and up to the traffic light and stopped. I was in the left turn lane, light was red. It was late out and there wasn't many people on the road. I watched as the light went yellow and then red for through traffic. One guy ran the tail end of the yellow, like usual. My turn. Light goes green. I have an arrow blinking for me to turn left. I looked both ways and there was no one around, and I just didn't go. I cannot explain what happened other than something inside me just said "don't go." So I sat there staring at the green light. A couple seconds later a car came screaming through the red light, through the intersection. Probably doing about 100 km/h. In the lane I would have been turning into. They were going so fast their vehicle had a bounce to it. If I had turned my car would have been destroyed, and me along with it. I sat there through the whole next light cycle and then turned, pulled over and called my sister. It was a ghostly feeling. I'm a light jumper. I look both ways, but I'm impatient, and I cannot explain what stopped me from going the second that light went green, but I'm glad it did. Edit, to correct me calling it an orange light yellow. Amber. Never used to lock my doors getting into my car 1987. Had to pursue the lockdown. Decided to lock them one night going home. At a stop sign, a man ran up to my car and started yanking on the door handle. He tried the rear door as I sped off, probably hurt the frick out of his hand. No idea why I locked them. So glad I did. A few years ago I was stopped at a red light around 3 AM. I had just picked up my BF from downtown. I had a sudden urge to look in my rearview mirror, and thank frick I did, because in it I saw a cell that was speeding and wasn't slowing down. I ended up halfway in the intersection to get out of their way. We both died. M from rear impact. I was taking my mom to a follow-up appointment from back surgery the month before. The freeway was closed due to a car accident and life flight was called to transport the people injured in the accident. The highway patrol was funneling everyone off of the freeway to the right side exit. I had the strongest feeling we needed to move to the left farthest lane, so I did. No more than a minute after I moved over, a garbage truck came barreling down the freeway and crashed into the car that was in front of us in the other lane so fast that it lifted the front end of the truck and it landed on top of the car. We were in a tiny sports car that would have crumpled like a tin can under the weight of a garbage truck and definitely would have killed my mom and me in a second. Edited for clarity. The sports car was a 1999 Mercury Cougar M510 Swede/Spaniard mix. It was tiny for me. Ha ha ha. Don't know if gut feeling or lucky coincidence. Decided I should empty the bin on my way to uni, which added maybe 10 seconds to my journey as the skip was 10 feet from my front door. Began my walk to uni and roughly 10 seconds of walking in front of me some idiot from the third floor flat threw a load of glass out his window, smashing all over the path. When driving around a curve on a bus route, I just felt the need to get as far to the right as I could on the road. As I went around the curve there was a semi halfway in my lane that almost hit me. Saved my and my students' lives. Went to go catch the bus, saw the bus about to pull out from the stop, and I could have made it if I ran. Something told me not to catch it and just wait for the next one, so I did. Caught the next bus half an hour later. Now, I usually sit at the back of the bus on the driver's side, so that's where I sat. A little way into the journey, traffic was slowing, and we got to the cause of it. A lorry had crashed into the bus I had missed, right into the back on the driver's side. Had I caught that bus, I wouldn't be here. Still gives me chills after 6 years. I was the first car stopped at a red light in the advanced left-hand turn lane. Light turns green for us and something tells me to do an extra check of the intersection before proceeding to make my turn. Car traveling the other direction runs the red, later found out she was drunk and smashes into a large lamppost that falls exactly where my car would have been if I had made that left. I was like 8 or 9 when my parents took me and my younger brother to stay the night at my paternal grandparents' house because they were in the middle of divorcing. They lived in a farmhouse that was connected to a barn with machinery, gasoline tanks, and hay on the ground floor, and furnished rooms on the floor above that, and the room we were supposed to stay in was in that barn. As soon as we went into the guest room, I was overwhelmed by panic and felt really dizzy. I turned around and just said that we will not sleep in that room, and we spent the night on the couch in the living room instead. Later that night, a gas leak in the barn ignited, and almost the entire barn including the guest rooms on its top floor exploded. Maybe I had that weird feeling because the gas had leaked into the room already but no one else felt anything, and I'm sure I would be dead if I hadn't noticed it. Not my life, but my cat's. I had a cat who loved getting into things and hiding. Drawers, cupboards, the fridge, anything that was small and dark, she loved it. One day I was doing laundry and I tossed everything in the dryer, shut the dryer door, and pressed the button. It was one of those ones that takes a minute to start. Something didn't feel right. I thought maybe I forgot to add dryer sheets or something. I turn off the dryer, open the door, and out pops my cat like, "Haha, you found me." Totally oblivious to what was about to happen ever. Since then I always double check before turning on an appliance. While riding my motorbike, coming back into my hometown, there is a big roundabout followed by a set of blind S-bends that lead onto a long straight. Knowing the road, I normally accelerate up to the speed limit as fast as possible as the bends can be taken at 60 miles per hour without any issues, and this gives me a good run onto the straight. I have done this hundreds of times. Then a couple of months ago I started to accelerate like normal, and I had a massive what if moment that made me feel sick to the bottom of my stomach. I instantly roll off the throttle and drop down to 30 miles per hour. As I entered the first bend I looked towards the next bend and saw one of the local boy racers in his chaved up Golf on my side of the road coming straight towards me. If I had been going my normal speed I would have met him halfway around the bend. After a party many years ago, I was driving home at like 4 AM with my friend, passed out in the passenger seat. I was driving fast down a steep hill that's like a 1/2 mile long, at least. I was on autopilot, as I drive down that street every day. Suddenly, about a half a block from a major intersection, which I had a green light for, a voice in my head said in these exact words, "You may want to slow down, because if you don't, you might lose your life." It was weird, because that's not how I talk. Anyway, I slowed down, and as I was entering the intersection, a car blew the red light at about 50-60 miles per hour, right in front of me. It was so close that I nearly threw up. I started shaking and punching my friend, yelling how I just saved our lives. OMG. He just groaned and went back to sleep. Punk.